Rejoice, episode 132, Barking at Boccaccio. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. Days before Christmas, let me remind you that in timely fashion, I have a bonus edition going up in 2 days. Yes, another dozen editions have passed, and the subject matter is The Dead, Joyce's great short story, whose setting is a family gathering in the festive season. Now, though, this week, at least this day, we go back to Ulysses and Stephen, depressed, lonely, and paranoid, sitting on a rock on Sandybound Strand. Here's the next chunk of text. Let's see how much of it I get through. And we are, I remind you, and take consolation from this, we are among some of the denser paragraphs in Ulysses, although there are some beauties up ahead, I can tell you. Wow, we're years away from them yet, though. Here's the quote. He saved men from drowning, and you shake at a cur's yelping. But the courtiers who mocked Guido in Or San Michele were in their own house. House of... We don't want any of your medieval abstrusiosities. Would you do what he did? A boat would be near, a life buoy, natural lake put there for you. Would you or would you not? The man that was drowned 9 days ago off Maiden's Rock, they're waiting for him now. The truth, spit it out. I would want to. I would try. I'm not a strong swimmer. End of quote. Stephen, if you remember, has just been through a hate fest in his mind, and the target was Buck Mulligan, his early morning mocker and general jeerer and betrayer. Now Stephen recants a little. He saved men from drowning, and you shake at a cur's yelping because Stephen has been trembling at the idea that the dog that's running loose on Sandymount Strand might come and attack him. The real-life Buck Mulligan, Oliver Gogarty, was an athlete, which Joyce was not, and a strong swimmer. And Stephen is drawing the comparison between Gogarty's, that is Mulligan's heroism, and his own cowardice when a dog barks. That's straight enough. Now comes one of Joyce's typical deeper references. But the courtiers who mocked Guido in Or San Michele were in their own house. Where's that from? For years now, I've made sure that I'm never far from my Folio Society beautiful copies of Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron. You can buy it in paperback. Anyone who's serious about writing has to have a copy of the Decameron on their bookshelves. And not only is it essential in understanding the early literary formalization of the thing we call story, it's damned entertaining. Guido and Or San Michele is a reference to the 9th tale of the 6th day. The Decameron, as you probably know, is a 15th century Italian work of literature in which 10 people, most of them fairly young, tell 100 stories in 10 days. Is a cool idea, by the way. Let me read to you from the introduction to the 6th day. It's the enormously interesting Richard Aldington's translation. I must do something on Aldington one day because he fascinates me. Here we go. Here's the quote from Aldington. Wherein tales are told, this is the setting up of the 6th day, wherein tales are told of those who have retorted a witticism directed at them, or with a quick retort or a piece of shrewdness, have escaped destruction, danger, or contempt, unquote. So, if Stephen has been dwelling on the insults hurled at him that morning by Buck Mulligan, you can see why he reached for this. And here's where the actual reference begins. In the Decameron. One day, Guido, he is, by the way, Guido Cavalcante dei Cavalcanti. One day, Guido set out from Or San Michele and made his way along the Corsa degli Ademari to San Giovanni. Okay, that's enough. Now, this really could derail me if I get into the Decameron. So I'll cut it short. Guido is a brilliant, charming, eloquent Florentine, and a bunch of his pals decide to tease him. He's a philosopher. They caught up with him in a graveyard, and because they found him aloof, they said to him, "You don't want to be one of us, but suppose you do find that God doesn't exist. What good will that be?" Guido said to them, "Gentlemen, you may say what you please of me in your own house." He vaulted over a marble tomb, and he was gone. And only then did they realize how he had insulted them, because he called the cemetery their house. Stephen actually says house of, but can't bring himself to say the word death. Well, they got it. They got the insult. They were illiterate dolts, was what the insult was saying, and therefore, to all intents and purposes, intellectually dead. They never teased Guido again. Let's go back to the sentences in Ulysses. But the courtiers who mocked Guido in Or San Michele were in their own house. House of? See, he can't say death. He can't say death because his mother's just died. And then he tosses in what he knows Mulligan would say. We don't want any of your medieval abstrusiosities. House of the dead, of course. And there's a dead dog on the beach. And look at that word again, abstrusiosities. It's made up. That's Stephen imagining how Mulligan would put him down with a made-up word. Now let's look at the next three sentences. Quote, would you do what he did? That is to say, save a man from drowning. And then Stephen imagines the scenario if he were to save a man from drowning, a boat would be near, a lifebuoy, naturally, put there for you. Would you or would you not? Stephen is just asking himself if he would try and save a drowning man like Mulligan did. Would you do what he did? And next he seeks the easy way out. A boat would be near, a lifebuoy. And now comes a word that has had many Joyce scholars puzzled. At this moment, Joyce drops in a German word, naturlich, meaning naturally there'll be a boat nearby or a life preserver ring for the drowning man to cling to. But why say it in German? Why there at that moment say it in German? Here's my take. If we hark back to chapter 1 and the 40-foot bathing place where Mulligan has gone swimming, well, Stephen back there was thinking, as Mulligan stripped for action, of the word Übermensch, remember? So naturally an Übermensch would save a drowning man. Now Stephen presses himself, would you or would you not? And he broadens his own inquiry to include an actual example from life. The man that was drowned 9 days ago off Maiden's Rock, they're waiting for him now. Remember how he saw people looking into the distance, wondering whether the corpse of a man who was drowned has yet surfaced? And Stephen reflects back then that the conventional wisdom says it takes 9 days for a drowned body to bob to the surface. Well, where else would he be thinking of such things except by the sea? And now, finally, he confronts himself. The truth. Spit it out. The truth meaning, would I or would I not try to rescue a man who was drowning? The truth, spit it out. I would want to. I would try. And then the apology. I'm not a strong swimmer. Now, what we've been seeing for the past few weeks here is Stephen's mood accentuating. On his long walk along Sandymount Strand, he sank lower and lower. Yes, he has money in his pocket because he has been paid, but also lectured by the headmaster, Mr. Deasy, at the school out in Dorking. Before that, in chapter 1, he had an unpleasant encounter in the tower and on the roof of the tower with Mulligan, who then, in front of the reasonably mannerly Haynes the Englishman, began to mock Stephen and his intellectual and philosophical constructs. So Stephen is Guido, as you can see. Now, nearsighted and without the spectacles he has broken, Stephen is afraid of being attacked by a dog and has seen many depressing sights on the sands by the water. His thoughts are gloomy and full of failure. Could he rescue a man from drowning? The truth, spit it out. I would want to. I would try. I'm not a strong swimmer. Not a strong swimmer through life either, it seems. And to top it all, where is he going to spend the night? He reaches back into his life, as many of us do, when confronted by fear, loneliness, or depression. And he recalls himself as a boy at school. In fact, the memory he reaches for takes him back into early boyhood, before he was 7 years old. And that's what I lead off with next week. Join me then. Rejoice, episode 133, Cool, Cool Water. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. I hope you had a Merry Christmas. And I said that I'd lead this week with Stephen casting his mind back to the days when he was a small schoolboy at the Jesuit school in Clongowes, County Kildare, where, if you read a portrait of the artist as a young man, you'll recall that he wrote his name and address as Stephen Dedalus, Class of Elements, Clongowes Wood College, Sallins, County Kildare, Ireland, Europe, the world, the universe. I remember doing similar things myself. Right now in Ulysses, Stephen is perched on a rock by the shore, hurt and lonely, watching the sea at Sandymount Strand and thinking of drowning men. Last week, you'll recall, he compared his own heroic instincts unfavorably with those of Buck Mulligan, and told himself that unlike Mulligan, he wasn't a strong enough swimmer to rescue someone from drowning. and probably wasn't brave enough either. Here's the next passage, and it's got a lot of pain and anxiety in it. These are all Stephen's thoughts, no third-party narrative here. Here we go. Water, cold soft. When I put my face into it in the basin, a clown goes, "Can't see. Who's behind me? Out, quickly, quickly." Do you see the tide flowing quickly in on all sides, sheeting the lows of sand quickly, shell cocoa-colored? If I had land under my feet, I want his life still to be his, mine to be mine, a drowning man. His human eyes scream to me out of horror of his death. With him together, down, I could not save her. Waters, bitter death, lost. You know, it almost doesn't need commentary. I wonder if Joyce was a touch hydrophobic. Water is certainly one of his concerns. He uses the word water and the word sea each more than 100 times in Ulysses, and of course he exploits the words for every metaphorical colour he can find in them. So first here he remembers the water at school, water, cold, soft. When I put my face into it in the basin, a clown goes, "Can't see who's behind me, out, quickly, quickly." And now we see one of Joyce's mergers again. What is Stephen talking about? Is he still thinking of the washrooms in school? Or is he afraid of being caught by the tide and wants it to go out, quickly, quickly? Do you see the tide flowing quickly in on all sides? He says to himself, sheeting the lows of sand quickly, shell cocoa-colored. If I had land under my feet? The cold water in the basins at school blinded him, and here he is on Sandy Mount Strand with the cold tides coming in, and he has no glasses. You know how I'm always talking about the firing of Joyce's synapses and thus our synapses? If I had land under my feet, in his depression, he feels his foundations, his emotional foundations, are going, slipping away. He's being undermined, he's on shifting sands. Now look what happens. He's thinking of the drowning man whose body they're waiting for to pop up after 9 days. And he says, I want his life still to be his, mine to be mine. A drowning man, his human eyes scream to me out of horror of his death. With him together, down, I could not save her. Waters, bitter death, lost. He's reaching back up to life from the depths of his drowning and depression. And remember how he began the day? By recalling his mother's death and being wounded by Mulligan's allegation that he killed his mother by not being as devout as she'd wished him to be. Well, he doesn't want the man whose corpse they're expecting to be washed up in the bay. He doesn't want him to be dead. And he's almost imagining himself being pulled down too into death. This is a squall of severe depression. Note, though, that it's not suicidal like so much depression. He's too paranoid for that. If he's to die, others will have caused it. So he hesitates. After the sentences, I want his life still to be his, mine to be mine, a drowning man, his human eyes scream to me out of the horror of his death. Then comes the abandoned word I, followed by with him together down. See what I mean? And now we come to it. One of the true roots of his depression that morning. I could not save her. Waters. Bitter death, lost. Death flooded in and took his mother. Yes, let me pause here and think out loud for a bit. Stephen's on a journey. That's what much of this chapter is about. I mean, this is the chapter of change, and when you're on a journey, the landscape is changing all the time. When Joyce began to discuss his work with others, he called this chapter Proteus, after the god of change. We've had all that before. And what changes things more than an incoming tide? It changes the appearance of the land, it changes the texture of the sand, it changes whatever it washes over. And his contemplation of it allows Stephen to change moods more than once. Remember how philosophically he began the chapter, with his discussions of philosophy with himself, and he treading the crackle of shells on the seashore with his eyes shut, walking into eternity, and thinking merrily mocking thoughts of his nuncle Richie sitting up in bed. And now we have him here, seeing the carcasses of a dead dog, the frightening aspect of a live dog that might or might not attack him and bite him, the wreck of a ship stuck up to its gunnels in the sand. All these are changed by the sea. even the live dog, who of course retreats, running from the incoming tide. And now, Stephen himself begins to change. He grows somber at the prospect of not wanting to or feeling able to go back to the Martello Tower that night because of mocking Buck Mulligan, whom he has been flaying politically in his thoughts. And the feeling of being cast out has led him to think thoughts that are more and more morbid until eventually he arrives at a point where his mother's death troubles him again. And in his fit of the blues, he includes thoughts of the man out in the sea who drowned last week and whose white bloated corpse may surface at any time. So, given all that, what can we expect next? Huh. The chapter is called Proteus, and the answer is easy peasy. We can expect change. We can expect change in the text, and that is indeed what we get, and that is what we'll have next week. Some terrific prose describing that rare thing in Ulysses or in any of Joyce. Action. Join me then. Happy New Year. And thank you for all your support throughout the year. Rejoice, episode 135, Cockle Pickers and Dog's Bodies. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. Here's this week's text. You'll get the impression at first glance that it's fairly unambiguous, mostly, and beautiful writing too. There's a surprise. And this is also one of those passages where you can begin to watch out for what comes along not long after. Bit of foreshadowing going on here, en general. Here we go. Having already encountered and felt threatened by their dog, Stephen is watching two distant figures on the landscape that is Sandymount Strand. Cockle pickers. They waded a little way in the water and, stooping, soused their bags and, lifting them again, waded out. The dog yelped, running to them, reared up and pawed them, dropping on all fours, again reared up at them with mute, bearish fawning. Unheeded, he kept by them as they came towards the drier sand, a rag of wolf's tongue red panting from his jaws. His speckled body ambled ahead of them, and then loped off at a calf's gallop. The carcass lay on his path. He stopped, sniffed, stalked round it, brother, nosing closer, went round it, sniffling rapidly, like a dog, over the dead dog's bedraggled fell. Dog skull, dog sniff, eyes on the ground, moves to one great goal. Ah, poor dog's body. Here lies poor dog's body's body. Tatters! Out of that, you mongrel! The cry brought him skulking back to his master, and a blunt, bootless kick sent him unscathed across a spit of sand, crouched in flight. He slunk back in a curve. Doesn't see me. End of quote. Mixture there, again, of narrative and interior monologue. Stephen's thoughts. Now, this dog is a German short-haired pointer, I'd bet. My wife used to have one named Coco. So I recognize the speckled body and the lope. Two people are walking the wide, wide strand, digging for cockles, saltwater clams that the tide has washed in and buried. The dog is looking for their attention. He jumps up on them, badly trained dog, and they ignore him. They have a bag for the cockles, which they keep dipping in the sea to keep the cockles wet and fresh-ish. And as they walk in from the little waves onto the drier sand, the dog follows them alongside. Don't you just love that description? The rag of wolf's tongue, red panting from his jaws. You see, that's the whole point about Joyce. He took all the liberty he wanted to with language, and sometimes, in fact, almost all the time, it came out brilliantly. Red panting is all one word. Now the dog races on and stops at the bloated carcass of the dead dog that we've come across in the last few weeks. Could it be a brother, Stephen wonders. He stopped, sniffed, stalked round it. Brother. And here's something I like, something interesting. Nosing closer, went round it, sniffling rapidly, like a dog all over the dead dog's bedraggled fell. Fell, F-E-L-L. This little four-letter word, or rather the choice of it, that's Vintage Joyce. I do not love thee, Dr. Fell. The reason why I cannot tell, but this I know, and know full well, I do not love thee, Dr. Fell. Run through some definitions of the word fell. Well, a fell is an English mountain and an Irish landscape by Killarney's lakes and fells. It also means to have fallen, and indeed the dead dog has fallen, hasn't he? And maybe he fell down because he was felled in one fell swoop. But the word fell, which can also mean foul, it's the term used for the kind of skin-like substance, the membrane under an animal's hide, a kind of epidermis-like, kind of subcutaneous substance. And in its primary meaning, as used here, a fell was actually a hide. And fell also means cruel, vicious, terrible. Down that pathway of language came the words villain and felon. Didn't James E. Joyce make the language work for him? Yeah, he did. He surely did. Dog skull, dog sniff, eyes on the ground, moves to one great goal. Well, here's a quote from a previous chapter when Mr. D.C., the egotistical and always wrong old schoolmaster, says that all human history moves towards one great goal, the manifestation of God. You'll find that in podcast number 86. Yeah, 86. And he was referring, as I may have said at the time, to the end of Tennyson's great poem, In Memoriam, for his friend Arthur Henry Hallam. The poem ends, "Where of the man that with me trod, this planner was a noble type, appearing ere the times are ripe, that friend of mine who lives in God, that God, which ever lives and loves, one God, one law, one element, and one far-off divine event, to which the whole creation moves." Moves to one great goal, the whole creation moves. My favorite lines, by the way, in Memoriam are, "In words like weeds, I'll wrap me o'er, like coarsest clothes against the cold." You see, this is how digressions happen. I was just about to launch into a thing about In Memoriam. 7 years it was in the writing. How did he keep that simplicity of verse together in all that time? Okay, enough. Okay. Dog skull, dog sniff, you know what's coming. Mulligan, Buck Mulligan, referred to Stephen as, in the first chapter, as poor dog's body, when he's offering to give him some hand-me-down clothes. Now, watch this. There's a dog's body, a carcass lying in the sand, and there's a dog sniffing it. But dog's body was the old term, a sailor's word, for the way they cooked peas at sea in a cloth. And Stephen is still thinking of the body floating out there in the bay with a human face that they'll wrap in a cloth when it washes up, or they haul it into a boat. And the fell around the carcass of the dog looks like a cloth. Ah, poor dog's body. Well, here lies poor dog's body's body. "Tatters! Out of that, you mongrel!" Now I see a flag waving. Another flag waving. Ulysses is like the forecourt of the United Nations. There's so many flags waving. Tatters is the dog's name. Why? Why Tatters? Could have been Rover, or Spot, or Blackie, or Brownie, or Coco. So why Tatters? Well, let's run through the meanings. Tatters means rags. And the dog's owners, as we shall see in coming podcasts, might not have been salubriously dressed. We've had hike skirts. Tatters is also an archaic slang name for breasts. It's not that common. My understanding is that it descended from tit for tat, and we got tat instead of tit, and that became tatters, as in, hoo-hoo, look at them tatters. But refinement won eventually, and we rarely hear it now. A tatter is also a rag and bone man, and people dressed in rags are also said to be tatters. And there's a thing called tatting, putting together threads, kind of needlepoint. So watch out for next week. Keep your eye on those two cockle pickers, or the week after. I don't know if I get to it next week. I'll try. "Tatters, out of that, you mongrel!" The cry brought him skulking back to his master, and a blunt, bootless kick sent him unscathed across a spit of sand, crouched in flight. He slunk back in a curve. Doesn't see me. "Mongrel, Another great word usage here, descended in part from the word mange, a disease that eats things, and in part from words meaning mixed. Think of the word among. That's that pathway. It means mixed breed. And again, when we think of that, we'll be looking at the cockle pickers. The cry brought him skulking back to his master, and a blunt, bootless kick sent him unscathed across a spit of sand crouched in flight. Well, the dog's clueless owner, clueless about raising dogs anywhere, training dogs, missed with his kick. What a way to treat a dog. And the dog fled. And we end with Stephen watching the pointer slink back to his master in a roundabout way, as dogs do, sort of casing him, sussing him out, finding out whether it's all right to be near his master again. When Stephen sighs with relief that the dog, of whom he's fearful, doesn't see him. More of the same next week. Rejoice, episode 136, Panther and Pause. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. This week's text continues the tale of Stephen watching the dog owned by two cockle pickers on the Strand at Sandybounce, south of Dublin. The dog has been careening around the place, trying to play with its owner, who tries to kick it away. Now the dog has come back to near where Stephen is sitting on a rock. Here's this week's text. Along by the edge of the mole he lolloped, dawdled, smelt a rock, and from under a cocked hind leg pissed against it. He trotted forward, and lifting again his hind leg, pissed quick short at an unsmelt rock. The simple pleasures of the poor. His hind paws then scattered the sand. Then his forepaws dabbled and delved. Something he buried there, his grandmother. He rooted in the sand, dabbling, delving, and stopped to listen to the air, scraped up the sand again with a fury of his claws. Soon ceasing, a pod, a panther, got in spouse breach, vulturing the dead. End of quote. And here again, we have the mixed that I never tire of pointing out. Straight sentences from Joyce, then a thought from Stephen, then more third-person narration from Joyce, more interior monologue, more thought from Stephen, and then a passage that begins with narration and segues into Stephen's thoughts, so that for a moment of arrest you have to stop and ask yourself, whose voice is this? It's a technique, as I say, I've pointed out before, and will again. So here we go. The first sentence is fairly clear, isn't it? Along by the edge of the mole, that's the lump of land, he lolloped, dawdled, smelt a rock, and from under a cocked hind leg pissed against it. Next sentence is narration 2, again highly visual, again faintly rude. He trotted forward, and lifting again his hind leg, pissed quick short at an unsmelt rock. Now we have a thought from Stephen. The simple pleasures of the poor. The simple pleasures of the poor. Remind you of anything? The curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The home-going herd winds slowly o'er the lea. Elegy in a Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray, written in Stoke Poges near London. Gray's Elegy, as it's more commonly known and parodied. And here's the relevant verse. Let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely joys and destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with a disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. The simple pleasures of the poor. I still love Gray's Elegy, and I can still recite chunks of it. I must test one day and see if I can do the whole thing in sequence. That, by the way, it's not so much remembering the lines. They're so well written that they're easy to remember. The trick is remembering it in sequence to get the stanzas in the right order. Now fades the glimmering landscape. Okay, enough. His hind paws then scattered the sand, then his forepaws dabbled and delved. Joyce, again, narrating. Haven't you seen dogs do that at the beach? Stephen thinking now, something he buried there, his grandmother. We're back to the riddle about the fox burying his grandmother. Podcast number 63, I think it was. And here comes a little coup de grace. A sentence where Joyce's third-person narration. Why do I want to keep calling it third party? It's third-person narration. This is where the narration flows seamlessly into Stephen's first-person thinking, his monologue intérieur, his free-flowing inner monologue. just running, thinking his thoughts like all of us have. Here's the sentence again, and watch where they meet. I'd identify it for you. He rooted in the sand, dabbling, delving, and stopped to listen to the air, scraped up the sand again with the fury of his claws, soon ceasing. That's where Joyce stops. Ceasing is followed by a comma. And now we have the following words. A pard, a panther, got in spouse breach, vulturing the dead. So up to the two words soon ceasing, it's Joyce's narration. And then in comes Stephen's thought. A pard, a panther, got in spouse breach, vulturing the dead. What's all that about? Well, a pard and a panther are one and the same thing. Pard is the old name for leopard, leopard, or panther. Remember John Keats's wonderful Ode to a Nightingale? Maybe my favoritist fave poem of all time. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but on the viewless wings of poesy. Panther, by the way, was originally a catch-all word. Pan, the Greek word meaning all, and ther, the root of the Greek word for beast. So that's panther. Vulturing the dead, well, that's easy. But what's this word spouse breach? Spouse and breach brought together. Well, it's obsolete now, though I think you'll find it if ever a case of criminal conversation is brought to court anywhere where that law is still extant. Criminal conversation is a law whereby a man can sue another man for seducing his wife. I've known of one case in Ireland in my lifetime. Read about it in the papers every day. Read the proceedings. Family in Cork. I made a documentary about another famous case of spouse breach in the 19th century. Oh, gay lap the waves of the shores of Lough Ennel, and sweet smelt the breeze mid the garlic and fennel. But gayer and sweeter than either of these were the songs of the birds in Lord Belvedere's trees. It was about an adultery, because that is what spouse breach is. Breaching or breaking the fidelity link between a husband and wife. Spouse breach. Simple, right? Why is it in here? What's Joyce doing with this? Now, this is a perfect example of where Mr. Joyce truly did go off to the races. Spouse breach, and this is where his reading staggers me. Spouse breach can be found in animals described in medieval bestiaries and other such catalogues of knowledge. I have here in front of me volume 16 of the Oxford Dictionary. They used to say that gin was mother's ruin. Well, the 20-volume Oxford Dictionary is my ruin. Here we go. Spouse breach. Elephants fight never for females, nor knoweth spouse breach. That's part of a definition of the usage used to define the word. And Leopardus is a cruel beast, and is engendered in spouse breach of a pard and a lioness. 13th century Franciscan Bartholomew, the Englishman, on the properties of things. That's the citation that I've just quoted you. And just below those citations is Mr. Joyce in our quote from Ulysses. So that's what spouse breach is. So Stephen sees the dog as a panther digging furiously. Why a panther? Well, German short-haired pointers can wear spotted coats. They can be brown too, just solid brown. There is another source possible, and given the reading that we know Joyce did in Paris, also quite likely. He was fascinated by the gathering and existence of knowledge. And there's evidence from the text of Ulysses, here and elsewhere, that he came across a very early encyclopedia, a European encyclopedia, called Tesoretto, Little Treasure, by a wonderfully interesting 13th century Italian scholar and orator named Brunetto Latini, who lived in Florence. Well now, Brunetto Latini compiled a compendium, a treasury if you like, of assorted facts. It's a thing I'd love to do myself. And one entry alludes to panthers and says that the female panther can ever bear only one cub, because the fetus, as it grows in the womb, deliberately wrecks the mother's uterus so that she can never have another cub. Preempting, I suppose, sibling rivalry. And there's absolute proof that Joyce knew of Brunetto Latini's Encyclopedia, and we'll come to that proof in or around the year 2026. But I'll be here before then. Next week, in fact. Join me then. Rejoice, episode 137, Dream On. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney, and this is one of the most interesting podcasts we've had for quite some time. Last week, we left Stephen on Sandymount Strand, watching a pointer dog scrabbling to dig something from the sand. We're still there this week. We will be for a few more weeks. Here's the next chunk of text. Stephen's thoughts. After he woke me last night. Same dream, or was it? Wait. Open hallway. Street of harlots, remember? Harun al-Rashid. I am almosting it. That man led me, spoke. I was not afraid. The melon he held against my face, smiled. Cream fruit smell. That was the rule, said. In, come. Red carpet spread. You will see who. End of quote. And once again, we say to ourselves with some justification, what in the name of all that's high and holy is going on here? Well, by now we're getting well into something that we'll watch for during the entire book, the unusual and often technically exquisite foreshadowing that Joyce in particular practices. Lots of writers do it. His is rather different. In the last couple of weeks, I've been mentioning that he's up to something, because there was a faintly erotic note creeping in. Tatters, a slang word for breasts, the woman with her skirties pinned up, a daring thing back in 1904, glimpse of stocking. Well, here we go. After he woke me last night, same dream, or was it? Wait. Open hallway. Street of harlots, remember? Stephen is thinking about a dream he had last night in the Martello Tower. He'd been awakened by Haynes, the Englishman's nightmare, about a black panther, to which, as we saw last week, he now likens this digging pointer dog. And then Stephen himself has a dream, has obviously had a dream. Now hold on to that word dream. And it might even have been a waking fantasy too. About what? Open hallway. Street of harlots. Remember? Ha! Did he visit a brothel? He might have in Paris, a city he called that lamp for lovers hung in the wood of the world. He certainly did have an encounter with a working girl on a canal bank in Dublin. And there's some steam rising from the later pages of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. There's a scene where Stephen has wandered into a maze of narrow, dirty streets and sees there women and girls dressed in long, colourful gowns, who traversed, he said, the street from house to house. The phrase that Joyce uses is that they were leisurely and perfumed. Aha! He says it all in 3 words. Leisurely and perfumed. And of course, this mention here of the Street of Harlots foreshadows one of the major chapters of Ulysses, much later, chapter 15, when Stephen at the end of the day visits the brothels of Dublin's night town. So, as with any of us human beings, the thought is now perhaps in his head. But there's another interesting connection, a word connection, and one worth looking at. The name Harun al-Rashid pops there into Stephen's thoughts. Now, there are 32 occurrences of the word pleasure in Ulysses, and 11, maybe 12, maybe 10 of those occasions, it has to do with sex. Harun al-Rashid, Aaron the Just, was the Caliph of Baghdad. Have you read The 1001 Nights? He was a caliph known for his serious liking of pleasure in all forms, the arts, music, pretty ladies, and so on and so forth. And by the way, if you haven't lately or never have read the Arabian Nights, do it again or do it for the first time. The stories, which some of you know, are very rewarding. And this is interesting. Told you this was an interesting week, and there's more to come. This is interesting. In his first draft, Joyce did not have Harun al-Rashid in chapter 3. But he did include him later. He did include the name, twice in fact, in that nighttime chapter, Circe, chapter 15, where the handwriting of the first draft is damn near illegible. So how did Harun al-Rashid, this is what I want to know, pop into his head between episode 3 and episode 15? Anyway, the content of these sentences points towards pleasure, and a lot more, as I hinted earlier. So I quote some of this week's sentences again. After he woke me last night, same dream, or was it? Wait. Open hallway, street of harlots. Remember? Harun al-Rashid. I am almosting it. By the way, note that in the novel's text, as I say, we meet Harun al-Rashid 3 times, a classical number of usages. And we meet him because Stephen is trying to get back into a dream. It's a thing we've all done, I'm sure. I do it all the time. Don't you love almosting it? There's no doubt, by the way, if you look at the text, that Joyce intended to write the word almosting. I mean, look at the handwritten text. He intended to write the word almosting, meaning he almost has the dream back, because Joyce's pen made a slight stumble on the letter S, and you can see in the original manuscript that he stabbed the pen again on the letter S to make sure he nailed it down. Not only that, he said to his friend Frank Budgeon in Zurich that he created the word in keeping with what he called the protean character of the thing. Everything changes in this chapter, he said. Land, water, dog, time of day. Parts of speech change too, he said. Adverb becomes verb. So, now you know why he wrote almosting. Let's move on. Next sentences. That man led me, spoke. I was not afraid. The melon he held against my face. Smiled. Cream fruit smell. That was the rule, said. In, come, red carpet spread, you'll see who. Unpack it a little. Some whipper in, some pimp perhaps, some barker was standing outside a brothel, addressed Stephen, who should have been nervous but wasn't. The man had a melon, smiled at Stephen. Stephen smelled the melon. Obviously, there was some kind of marketing technique about the melon. That was the rule. Said, in, come. And there was a red carpet. And then the man told him, you'll see who's in here. But look at the construction. Don't worry about the content too much. Look at the construction. Isn't this fragmentary in the way dreams are fragmentary? And here, now, we begin to touch on something really big. And I'm going to stick my neck out and say, has there been another writer of major fiction who made so much of dreams? As we go through Ulysses, the idea of the dream and the actuality of the dream will crop up again and again and again. And, what is Finnegan's Wake but one long dream? Joyce was fascinated by dreams, this is well known. He wanted them to reveal things to him. He wasn't interested in Jung or Freud. Richard Ellman has an account in his biography of how Joyce once kept a dream book and even attempted interpretations of his wife's dreams. Actually, the more you examine it, the more you realize that there are dreams all over Joyce. When he was 20, he wrote a verse play called Dream Stuff. In the soft night fall, hear thy lover call, hearken the guitar, lady, lady fair, snatch a cloak in haste, let thy lover taste the sweetness of thy hair. And remember, Ulysses starts because of a dream. The reason Stephen left the Martello Tower is because he was disturbed by another man's dream, the Black Panther nightmare, Haynes the Englishman. And since this is so important, because what we've hit here is a whole new theme, let me just quote this. I don't in general like quoting other than Ulysses on this, as you know. Let me just quote this from Richard Ellman on Finnegan's Wake. By that I mean I don't like quoting from other stuff when I'm doing Ulysses, other Joyce stuff. Here's Ellman. Joyce, hold on, where's the page? Here it is. Here we go. Joyce wished to invade the world of dreams. From his youth in Dublin, despite his distaste for Freud, he had taken a great interest in dreams, his own and other people's, and in their interpretation. In Zurich, he often talked about dreams with Budgeon. Actually, now, I've just remembered that he was enormously interested in a dream notebook that Budgeon kept. And Ellman goes on to say, He said to Edmund Jaloux, another friend, that his novel, Finnegan's Wake, would be written to suit the aesthetic of the dream, where the forms prolong and multiply themselves, where the visions pass from the trivial to the apocalyptic. There we go. So, we'll have, therefore, dreams and dream forms all through Ulysses, and I'll try to identify them for you as they crop up. Here, for example, it's simple enough, with Stephen reaching for his dream in fragmented half-thoughts. Let me see if I can mimic dream talk, language as I know it, from my own currently copious and vivid dreams. That man led me, spoke. I was not afraid. The melon he held against my face, smiled. Cream fruit smell. That was the rule, said. In, come. Red carpet spread. You'll see who. Ha. Yes, that's a dream, all right. And with some erotic content. Melons in Joyce are a kind of synonym for buttocks, usually female. I'm delighted that we're onto this dream thing. It's really interesting. Be here next week. Rejoice, episode 138, Egyptians and Cant. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. Here's the next paragraph from episode 3, the chapter that Joyce called Proteus, because Proteus was the god of change, and everything in this chapter changes all the time. The sea, Stephen's thoughts, the clouds, the people, the dog's behavior. Now I'll read you the entire next paragraph, but I may not get through it all in the unpacking. Let's see. Stephen has been watching the dog that's been careening around Sandymount Strand. He's afraid the dog will come near him because he's afraid of dogs. And in the distance he sees the cockle pickers who own the dog. They are two figures out by the surf. They're digging in the sand for clams. They've got bags for holding the clams. And here we go. Shouldering their bags, they trudged, the red Egyptians. His blued feet, out of turned-up trousers, slapped the clammy sand, a dull brick muffler strangling his unshaven neck. With woman steps, she followed, the ruffian and his strolling mort, spoils slung at her back. Loose sand and shell grit crusted her bare feet. About her wind-draw face, hair trailed. Behind her lord, his helpmate, Bingawast de Romeville. When night hides her body's flaws, calling under her brown shawl from an archway where dogs have mired, her fancy man is treating two royal Dublins in O'Loughlin's of Blackbits. Buss her, whap in rogue's rum lingo, for oh my dimber whapping dell, a she-fiend's whiteness under her rancid rags, Fumbly's lane that night, the tan-yard smells. End of quote. Okay, then. Make head or tail of that? Well, we are going to. Shouldering their bags, they trudged to the red Egyptians. These two cockle pickers out there in the distance by the water, they are, in Stephen's estimation, Irish travelling people, tinkers, gypsies, tinsmiths. There's long been a tradition that the word gypsy comes from the word Egypt, that the gypsies were indeed, in another tradition, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, or a lost tribe, or a tribe expelled from Palestine by Pontius Pilate because he believed, as the Romans did, that they harboured the infant Jesus. Several years ago, I tried to track down all those sources, and I didn't do well. Their European references identify an early medieval Eastern Indian nomadic people with a strong settlement in Eastern Europe. The languages they spoke had an Indo root, indeed, as English has an Indo-European root. They had an Indo-Aryan root. And the ancient Celts, or what we call the ancient Celts, well, they also began to come from India, more than 1,000 years earlier, perhaps, up through the Middle East in search of good land, and the dates of their first traces in Austria and Switzerland, those dates range from about 800 BC, and that's a kind of general date for the Celts in Europe. But no migration, of course, is over in decades. Just suppose, this is a new thought to me, suppose that Celtic migration never really ceased and maybe came down to a trickle. And suppose the Celts were indeed from the Himalayas. Isn't there then an argument to say that these Indian nomads, these gypsies of 500 AD, that they were of the same stripe and also came up through the Middle East? The Celts were very colourful, exotic people, and it was the French who gave this later group of exotic travellers the term Egyptian. Well, it's a theory anyway. And not only did these Romanes, which is what they always called themselves, not only did they not come from Egypt originally, they didn't originate in Romania either, though they settled there, as well as in other places. Rom, R-O-M, was the word in their Indo-based language for the male sex, the man. And the Irish branch, if that's the right word, of these travellers, that's always been believed to be mixed, with some of the Indo-origination and others descended from displaced and evicted Irish families. And I remember growing up with the families of travellers who came to our house were names like Sheridans and McCarthy's and O'Sullivans and Delaney's, which caused great mirth in our house, I can tell you, because my mother's maiden name was O'Sullivan, and of course we're Delaney's, so there was back and forth between my parents on that one. Okay, next sentence in Ulysses. His blued feet out of turned-up trousers slapped the clammy sand, a dull brick muffler strangling his unshaven neck. That's a clear enough picture. Blued feet is interesting. Blue from the cold, because he's been paddling in the sea? Maybe. But it is June. My guess is that he's been walking on seaweed, and his feet were getting iodine stains, which are kind of a black, brown, blue, and in the distance, and with Stephen's bad sight, remember he's broken his spectacles, they might look blue. Here's an interesting word coming up. Did you pick it up in the original reading of the paragraph? With woman steps she followed, the ruffian and his strolling mort. M-O-R-T. Well, first of all, with woman steps she followed. Isn't there a term, an Indian wife, meaning a woman who walks 3 paces behind her husband in typical uneducated inequality? Yes? And so, with woman steps she followed. Now here comes the word. The ruffian and his strolling mort. M-O-R-T. In Dublin, there used to be a term for a marriageable girl or a girlfriend, the mot. Hey, he was there the other night and the mot was with him. Or he has a new mot. Did you hear that? He's a mot. It's the same as chick or bird or bint in England or any of the other familiarizing slang terms for a single girl whom a man might marry. Now we have in Ulysses the most likely origin of mot, mort. And it is indeed a very old word. It has several meanings. It means a corpse, obviously mortuus, death, dead. It means a death. De mortuis nil nisi bonum, of the dead speak nothing but good. It means a fleece. Here's a nice one. It's the note on a huntsman's horn at the death of a deer. Blow the mort, when the deer is being killed by the hounds. And in this incarnation, it has some background as the wife of a travelling peddler, and it also means a loose woman or prostitute as well. So here we have the gypsy and his mort, or mot. It comes up later in Ulysses too. You'll see a music hall poster advertising a singer. And the gypsy man, he's wearing a dark red scarf, which is around his neck, and he hasn't shaved. They're barefooted on the sand. And the next 3 short sentences colour in the picture in a way that Joyce does so superbly. Spoils slung at her back, that's her bag of clamshells. Loose sand and shell grit crusted her bare feet. About her windrow face, hair trailed. Vivid, eh? You can actually see the sack of cockles. And we know from that she's an outdoors woman, a traveller, because we can see the lines that the wind has drawn on her face over the years. Lovely stuff, that. Now, how about this next sentence? Behind her lord, his helpmate, Bing awast to Rumville. B-I-N-G-A-W-A-S-T. First 2 phrases are clear enough. Behind her lord, his helpmate. But what in heaven's name is Bing awast to Rumville? What's that about? Well, we know of Joyce's vast fascination with language in all forms, and Bing is a noun meaning a heap, a pile. The word bin comes from it. Think of bread bin or dustbin. And it's also a verb, meaning to pile up. And they're piling up cockles. It's also a gypsy dialect term, meaning to go somewhere. Being a wast, you're listening to traveller's language here. A wast, is the gypsy dialect term. And here are two possibilities that are more than likely. In Ireland is the first possibility. In Ireland, the rough and tumble versions of language that travellers used to speak, and some perhaps still do, they're called shelta, or cant, or gammon. I remember a traveller, we used to call them tinkers, a term, by the way, they were known not to like. They preferred to be called tinsmiths. I remember one of those travellers, one of those men, saying to my mother, saying admiringly of his mother, "She still have the gammon. She can talk the gammon like, and she talk it a lot." She still has the gammon. She can talk the gammon, the language, and she talks it a lot. And there's all kinds of stuff, linguistic stuff, in the cant or the gammon or the shelter, the snatches of Gaelic and English and who knows what else. And they used to use it in their own conversations while trading horses to folk who weren't travellers. So, being a wast to Romeville means to go off to somewhere important. Romeville, a kind of capital, traveller's capital, notional capital. It was also used, I think, I'm pretty certain, I'll have to check this for you, but I'm pretty certain that Romeville was also a Romany word for London. But I will check it. Now, I'm not fully done and I'm out of time, but it does bring me to the next sentences, and I'll read them to you again. We'll look at them next week, but I'll set them up for you. When night hides her body's flaws, calling under her brown shawl from an archway where dogs have mired, her fancy man is treating two royal Dublins in O'Loughlin's of black pits. Bus her, whap in rogue's rum lingo, for oh my dimber whapping dell, as she fiends whiteness under her rancid rags. Fumbly's lane that night, the tan-yard smells. We're looking at two main strands here. One is Joyce in narration, the other is his attempt to summon some cant, some traveller's language, and he's calling on them from two sources that he obviously knew. At least I'd swear he knew them. There was a gentleman by the name of Thomas Harmon and a gentleman by the name of Richard Head. We shall meet them both next week. They are very, very interesting. Join me then. Rejoice, episode 139, Bussing and Whopping. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. Do you recall where I left you last week? You were lounging near these sentences. When night hides her body's flaws, calling under her brown shawl from an archway where dogs have mired, her fancy man is treating two royal Dublins in O'Loughlin's of black bits. Bus her, whap, in Rose rum lingo, for oh my dimber whapping dell, as she fiends whiteness under her rancid rags. Fumbly's lane that night, the tan-yard smells. End of quote. And last week, because of what I've just read, I promised to introduce you to two gentlemen who have relevance, Richard Head and Thomas Harmon. Well, here they are. Thomas Harmon was an Englishman born in the 1500s who specialized in writing about lowlife. And Richard Head, I know, don't go there. He couldn't help his name, which, in any case, existed long before our coarse patois of today. Richard Head was an Irishman born in the 1600s who specialized in writing about lowlife. It's really not very nice of me to laugh like that. The word central to both those gentlemen's literary output is the word rogue. Now, this is an interesting word. Can't you just tell the fun I'm having here every week? With Stephen Dedalus on Sandymount Strand, we've been looking at a couple and their dog. The dog, a pointer, has been rampaging across the sand in high spirits. The couple have been out by the water's edge, digging cockles, clams, seafood, and bringing them home in a sack they're carrying. Stephen has decided to, despite their distance from him, he's decided to categorize them as Irish travellers, gypsies, tinkers, despite the fact that, already nearsighted, he has no spectacles. But he makes that decision all the same. And so his mind, that's to say Joyce's mind, takes off into a kind of brief rap, a riff on the language of the travellers, who had and still have dialect languages, which in part at least spin out from the English language. And that is where Mr. Harman and Mr. Head enter the picture. Harman published something that he called a caveat or warning for common cursitors, vulgarly called vagabonds. He dedicated this piece of self-help, I suppose you could call it, 17th century self-help book, to Elizabeth, Countess of Shrewsbury, whom he wished all joy and perfect felicity here and in the world to come, and he basically set down for her a catalogue of the abominable, wicked, and detestable behaviour, I'm quoting, of every kind of rake-hell, hooker, petty thief, and scam artist that he could think of. All the unlawful language-picking, pilfering, wily wandering, and lechery of all these rabblement of rascals that ranges about the coasts of England. And he lists them, and he categorises them and their doings. I'm now editing myself heavily because, I assure you, this is a side road that I would easily go down and stay down for a long time. It's fascinating. Fascinating. Particularly the language. You have rogues, you have upright men, prankers, palyards, freighters, a dozen more. If you're at all interested in medieval history, especially social history in this language, go there. I give you the name of Thomas Harman's book again. It's called A Caveat or Warning for Common Cursitors, vulgarly called vagabonds. Now, Mr. Head, Dick, produced a book too, a novel called The English Rogue. And here's the expository part of his title. The book was described as The Life of Meryton Latroun, a witty extravagant, comprehending a complete history of the most eminent cheats of both sexes. Imagine that, with uppercase letters introducing each word. Here's a sentence I've picked from it, just at random. Joyce doesn't have this. I just took it from the book anywhere. And I'll allow myself this and just this. Here he is. Here's Mr. Head in his novel. It is observed that it hath been the fashion to wear yellow ruffs, but after one Mrs. Turner, a notoriously wicked woman, was hanged with one of them around her neck, that mode not only vanished, but became shamefully ridiculous. Now here's the point. There was available to Joyce a good history of the language of people who lived on the edge of life, as did the cockle-pickers on Sandymount Strand, especially if they were indeed Irish travellers. But Joyce conflated the idea with that of being rogues, because the Irish travellers had a bad reputation for stealing and pilfering. So we get from Stephen's thoughts an outburst that does a number of things. It imagines a scene that night or every night, in the language of the people in that scene, and it acknowledges the existence of their language. Here are the Joycean sentences again, and then I'll translate them for you. When night, Stephen's thoughts, when night hides her body's flaws, calling under her brown shawl from an archway where dogs have marred, her fancy man is treating two royal Dublins in O'Loughlin's of Blackpits. Buss her, whap in rogues rum lingo for oh my dimber whopping dell. A she-fiend's whiteness under her rancid rags. Fumbally's lane that night. The tanyard smells. End of quote. Okay. He's assuming that the woman is a hooker. Her perfections and imperfections, concealed by darkness, she drums up trade under an archway, awash in dog dirt. Her fancy man is treating two royal Dublins in O'Loughlin's of Blackpits. Her pimp is also drumming up trade. He's buying drinks for two soldiers from the Royal Dublin Regiment in a pub or speakeasy called O'Loughlin's in an old district of the city called Blackpits. And here we go with the arcane stuff. Buss her, whap in rogues rum lingo for oh my dimber whopping dell. Buss is kiss, an old dialect word, still in use when I was growing up, possibly a little onomatopoeic. Whap, W-A-P, is to have sex. And it comes from a dialect word, several centuries old, meaning to throw or pull to the ground. In rogues' rum lingo you can tell is language, Here now you see the origin, and you can tell that Joyce had been reading Thomas Harmon or Richard Head. Rum is a still in use term for odd, for strange, or queer, or different, peculiar. That's a bit rum. We say it to this day. And it may even have come from the gypsy word for a man, a rom. They certainly looked different. Oh, my dimber whopping dell. Well, now that's straight from the 17th century and the language of lowlife. And now we know for certain that in fact Joyce knew Richard Head's Canting Academy book, because two of his lines come out of a song in there. Bing a wast to Romeville, we had that last week, my dimber whopping dell. Dimber means pretty. Whopping, sexy or hookerish. Dell is a woman or a girl. A dell being a valley or a little cleft in a field or wood. Get it? Got it? Good. The song that Richard Head wrote is, the rogue's delight in praise of his strolling mort. Remember we had mort last week? A mort, a woman, a girl, sometimes of easy virtue. And just to give you a further flavour of what Joyce had access to, it doesn't come into Ulysses, but here we go. This is a verse from the same song. My honey chuck, by the mass I swear, thine eyes do shine than far more clear. No silken girl hath thighs like thine. No doe was ever bucked like mine. You get the mood, I think. I'm not going to get too explicit here. So let me look back at the quote here in the book. Yes, let's finish it out. A she-fiend's whiteness under her rancid rags. Fumbally's lane that night, the 10-yard smells. Under her clothes, this girl was as white as a ghost, as a spectre, as a demon from hell, and her clothes stank to high heaven. Fumbally's Lane, there is such a place in the Liberties of Dublin, near the Black Pits mentioned earlier, and it was an artisan area, hence the 10-yard smells. Or did they also come off the working girls' clothes? But there was a known tannery nearby. And let's also be careful here, because there might be something else going on linguistically. Stephen is picturing the scene. Is the woman out picking cockles a prostitute who that night will be plying her trade under a notch in the old part of Dublin, while her man is in a pub persuading two soldiers to have sex with his woman? Fumbal. In rogue's language, that's an old word for hand. It's also an 18th century word for sex, and a young husband or an impotent man was called a fumbler, which is why, for his purposes precisely here, Joyce was glad to remember that Dublin had a place called Fumbally's Lane. Remember, he's writing this abroad, far, far from Ireland. And by the way, all this linguistic observation, all of that, everything I've been quoting this week, it was in his very first draft of Ulysses. And one last thought. I called this week's episode, as you heard, Bussing and Whopping. Sounds much more palatable than kissing and fornicating, doesn't it? More next week. Join me then. Rejoice, episode 140, Prayers and Slang. Hello, I'm Frank Delaney. Did I leave you last week with 10-yard smells in your nostrils from deep in old Dublin? I believe I did. Well, here's the next piece of chapter 3, with Stephen still musing on Sandymount Strand and watching two tinkers make their cockle-picking way along the sands. Bear with me now, this is stubborn stuff. First we have what looks like the verse of a song. Certainly that's the way Joyce wrote it out in his handwriting. I've just been looking at it. Here it comes, here's the verse. White thy fambles, red thy gan, and thy quarrons dainty is. Couch a hogshead with me then, in the dark man's clip, and kiss. And it's followed by his trademark internal monologue, which, as we now so well know, can be about anything. That's why I keep saying that Ulysses is like life itself. Here's the passage that comes after the verse. It's Stephen thinking again as he sits looking at the sea and the tinkers. Morose delectation, Aquinas Tunbelly calls this, frate porca spino. Unfallen Adam rode and not rutted. Call away, let him thy quarrons dainty is. Language no whit worse than his. Monk words, merry beads jabber on their girdles. Rogue words, tough nuggets, patter in their pockets. Passing now. End of quote. Right, well, we're still in the lexicon of rogues. But enter a monk. This is clever writing, and not for reasons of ringing and unusual language. It's clever because Joyce, who openly practiced obfuscation, he courted it. Because he does something generous and smart here. By putting down a verse, an actual four-line quotation, he releases us, his readers, into the freedom to see where he has been for the last few paragraphs. This verse, should you have been digging into Ulysses, which, after all, he wanted the professors to do for 300 years, this verse comes from a source which contains much of the other language and terminology that he's been using lately in Chapter 3. It comes from Richard Heads. I mentioned him last week, and I'm quite over my fit of frivolous irreverence, thank you. It comes from Richard Head's poem or ballad, The Rogue's Delight in Praise of His Strolling Mort, and that's from his book that was published in 1673, The Canting Academy. Or to put it in a way that we'd recognize, his Handbook of Gypsy Dialect. And more than gypsy, actually, lowlife, really. It was basically a slang lexicon, with, by the way, a wonderful expository handle to the title. It's The Canting Academy, or The Devil's Cabinet Opened, wherein is shown, S-H-E-W-N, the mysterious and villainous practices of that wicked crew, commonly known by the name of Hectors, Trepanners, Gilts, etc., to which is added a complete, C-O-M-P-L-E-A-T, canting dictionary, both of old words and such as are now most in use, with several new catches and songs composed by the choicest wits of the age. How's about that for getting that on the cover of a book? And having already given snitches and snatches from that song, that ballad, The Rogue's Delight in Praise of His Strolling Mort, that, by the way, as you probably remember from last week and the week before, it's, a lowlife delighting in praise of his girlfriend, or his girlfriend who might also be working as a hooker. After all that, Joyce now gives us one complete stanza. And run it through for you again. White thy fambles, red thy gan. Your hands are white, your mouth is red. And thy quarrons dainty is. Nice body. Couch a hogshead with me then. Will you sleep with me? In the dark man's clip and kiss. In the night we'll embrace and kiss. Clip, by the way, is interesting here. A clip holds something tight, doesn't it? Like a hair clip, see? Joyce uses clip to mean embrace, holding something tight. And just for fun, here without translation, is the first stanza of that poem. I'll not translate it for you because it is quite rude. Doxy, oh thy glazers shine, as glimmer by the Salomon. No gentry morth hath prats like thine, no cove e'er wopped with such a one. And if I remind you that wop means to fornicate, you'll see why it's on the rude side. And here, by the way, is Richard Head's own account of what a strolling mort was. Strolling morts are such as pretend to be widows. Travelling about from county to county, they are subtle queens, hard-hearted, light-fingered, hypocritical, and dissembling, and very dangerous to meet. There we go. Now, let's move on to Joyce's own prose. Morose delectation. What's that mean? Well, that's what we were told was a sin. Morbid thoughts, my boys. Morbid, impure thoughts. Well, strictly speaking, it means deriving pleasure from evil thoughts. Do you entertain impure thoughts, my child? No, father, but they sure as shouldn't entertain me. What we're talking here is, of course, sexual fantasy. Morose delectation, Aquinas Tunbelly calls this, frate porcospino. Well, he's referring there to Thomas Aquinas, a man of enormous girth, the Chris Christie of the early church. Frate porcospino, brother Porcupine. Here's the entire assembly of the sentence. Morose delectation, Aquinas Tunbelly calls this, frate porcospino. Sexual fantasy, the fat Thomas Aquinas calls this, these thoughts I'm having, says Stephen to himself, the prickly brother or monk or friar. The porcupine. The prickly bit may have to do with the way Aquinas hedged himself with on the one hand and on the other hand. He just put fences around every argument, and the criticism of him among some theologians used to be that Aquinas was too defensive, aggressively so. Joyce's next sentence, Stephen's next thought: unfallen Adam rode and not rutted. Well, that's plain enough. It's a bit rude. Unfallen Adam meaning Adam before the apple. Apparently, all sex was innocent then. Rode meaning mounted. Rutted meaning mounted with more animal and less innocent. That's to say, tainted intent. Interesting use of rutted there too, given earlier stag motifs. Next phrase: call away let him, thy quarren's dainty is. Quarrens, repeat of nice or delicate or dainty body. Quarrens is body. Call away let him, meaning the husband can keep calling to the wife while she's plying her randy trade, or, is Stephen fantasizing that the wife is about to come to him, no matter how the husband calls? Let him call away. Is that the sexual fantasy he's having? Next phrase: language no whit worse than his. What's this about? Let's look. I see, we have to go forward a bit. The his refers to Aquinas, I believe. Stephen is comparing the monkish words to the gypsy words, the rogue words to the prayers. Listen, here it is again. Language no whit worse than his. Monk words, merry beads, jabber on their girdles. Rogue words, tough nuggets, patter in their pockets. What he's saying is, the friars have their language, and they jabber their words in time to the rosary beads, Mary beads, because the rosary celebrates Mary, the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God. The rosary beads that hang at their waists. And the gypsies down there on the shore, they have their cant, their dialect, as the tough nuggets patter in their pockets. Now, Stephen could be imagining that they've got chunks of gold in their pockets. Or he could be thinking that the gypsy husband had put some cockles in his pocket because the bag is full. Or, given the sexual nature of Stephen's thoughts, it could be the man's testicles. Dublin slang often called testicles jewels. I got a kick in the jewels. So that's what we might be thinking about there. Finally, a two-word phrase, passing now. They're walking past him. Or is the sexual fantasy over? The scene isn't over yet, the scene of Stephen and the gypsies on the strand. Thomas Aquinas would not be a happy little bunny, a fat one, certainly, but not a happy one at what is yet to come. And we'll get to that next week.